Assalamualaikum dan salam sejahtera. Anda sedang menonton rakaman khas agenda Awani dan hari ini saya ada kesempatan kerana ada kalanya Kuala Lumpur dikunjungi oleh badan-badan antarabangsa dan salah satunya baru-baru ini adalah sebuah organisasi yang melihat ke arah pemakanan yang lebih baik dan mereka menganjurkan supaya kita pergi jauh daripada makan daging dan sebagainya. Dan dalam konteks itu pada 12 bulan Mei sekumpulan daripada mereka telah pun berjalan memakai seperti yang kita lihat kalau pasukan hazmat memakai pakaian untuk berhadapan dengan gas toksik dan sebagainya, tetapi di pakaian mereka letak bahawa daging itu toksik misalnya. Dan dalam konteks itu saya ingin minta izin untuk berbicara dalam bahasa Inggeris. I would like to welcome Ashley, an activist for the people for the ethical treatment of animals, or PETA. And PETA is very famous around the world, and those who surf the net will even know it better. But I guess for today in this discussion, Ashley, I would like to tap into your views because to walk in the heat in suits like that in Bukit Bintang is a big deal. And the point is, we all have this thinking now because organic food has been making its rounds and they are accessible for a lot of consumers. However, the price seems to be something that has stopped maybe some people from migrating to organic totally. But if we go back to the reason why do we have organic alternatives, it's because the belief in the safety and sustainability of the food that we have, of the food supplies that we have access to right now, is not entirely convincing, especially from the safety perspective. And I remember a few years ago, in the meeting of Nobel laureate scientists with young scientists in Lindau, a Nobel laureate pointed out in his presentation, first he put the map of the world and the areas where red meat is consumed more than the others, and of course that will be the developed nations. And then he put on another slide on top of that slide, and it's the slide of the mad cow disease, for example. There's no direct correlation proven scientifically, but there are patterns like that has been thrown out. So I guess my first question to you, how serious is this worry about meat in this case being toxic for human consumption?
Well, certainly food safety is something that everyone should be concerned about. And when you're consuming meat, you're putting pesticides and antibiotics and hormones into your body. So the simplest way to improve your own health and to ensure the food that you're eating is safe is simply to adopt a vegetarian diet.
Mm-hmm. When you look at these parts of the world, I mean, this discussion in America, maybe in Europe, has gone on further and further. But for Asia especially, you know, some will say, yeah, but I don't eat American meat, for example. So how do you distinguish this? Because I guess the point when I read the press release in conjunction with the walk that PETA had in Bukit Bintang is that when a lot of animals are put together in enclosures, so that's when we start looking at all the things that you've just said just now. Because with free range in smaller quantities before, we didn't discuss these things. But now, as food security, for example, so a lot of countries are looking at large-scale farming and rearing of animals. So is this at the crux of this issue that we're discussing?
Exactly. So factory farming is something that happens in Asia as well as in America. There is a common misconception that it's not happening yet here in the Asia region, but it absolutely is. And the vast majority of animals that are raised for meat are coming from these factory farms. So for their entire lives, they're crammed in barren, windowless sheds or cages. They're packed so tightly they have no room to spread their wings or to even walk around in a circle. So these animals are living highly stressed in a highly stressed environment, and as a result farmers are pumping them full of drugs just to keep them alive in these stressful conditions.
Scientifically, how does PETA look at all all this? I mean, do you have a team looking at it? Do you shadow the scientists doing research on this? Or how do you look at it from the science perspective?
That's actually a really good question. And PETA employs the most number of scientists, more than any other animal welfare NGO in the world. And the reason is that so that we can follow these studies, so we can know what's coming out there in science and research, and be aware of how animal agriculture is affecting human health and, of course, the environment. Because meat is not just toxic for our own bodies, but also for the environment around us.
I have to go for the first break, but once we are back, let's talk about specific cases maybe that PETA has had experience in the West, especially because this industry is more developed there. And in America, of course, you have specific government agencies, for example, to look at this, the FDAs and whatever else. So if big governments, and the biggest government in the world in terms of power is the American government, if they have specific mechanisms to deal with food safety, but however, we look at PETA, we look at so many other NGOs, for example, or CSO, civil society organizations, and there's always room to argue otherwise. And maybe this side of the world, we haven't moved to that level yet. So maybe we can learn from that experience in America, and let's talk about that after this break. You know, it's not always that I have guests from PETA here. I think Ashley is the first guest that I have from People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. I've only been reading about what your organization does on the internet, but now that you're here, and on the 12th of May, you know, a group of people representing PETA and the struggle that you're fighting for, especially in this case when you came in KL, it's about meat being toxic, and that's the point. Back to the fact that, you know, in America, you know, this has been thought of, analyzed, debated for many, many years. And we know America have this big organization called FDA, Food and Drug Administration, for example. So a lot of people will be thinking, if this big, powerful government have this big, powerful organization, and they rule the rules in many things, and they say it's okay, then how could smaller organization, non-governmental like that, prove them otherwise?
Well, simply science tells us otherwise. And like you were mentioning earlier, in North America, where red meat consumption is extremely high, there are higher incidences of disease. So we're seeing more heart disease, more heart attacks, more strokes, more Alzheimer's, more cancer, more diabetes, and an obesity epidemic. And certainly Asia is following suit. So if you look at the correlations between the amount of meat people are eating and the amount of money they're spending on healthcare, it's easy to see that there's a direct link between the food that we're putting in our bodies and what's happening to human health.
You know, there's a lot of science involved, and I remember the fight when I discussed about cigarettes and cancer, you know, until now that's still being debated, that link, that final proof that will put the nail in. But I guess it's the same for food and also consumption of food, because yes, we'll be reading about it, sometimes very interesting to read, but the next moment when we have to go and eat food, that's as if it's beside the point. So from all the experiences that you've had advocating this, it's not just the science, but it's also the psychological and the perception base of a human being, for example. Is that the case?
Absolutely. And I would urge everyone, if you're thinking about going vegetarian and you're not sure if it's something that's going to work for you, simply try it. Simply give it 2 weeks or a month and see how you feel, because I guarantee that you're going to feel lighter, you're going to have more energy, your digestion will improve, and it's going to be something that you want to stay with. So if you're having doubts and you're not sure if you can really do it, just give it a try. Your body is going to thank you, and it's going to be something that you're going to want to continue to do.
How is the advocacy in countries like America coming on? You know, because now we hear so many alternatives, for example, but at the same time, there's still a lot of people engaged in what they are used to for example. So if that's not working in the more mature developed nation, what kind of different strategies would be needed for developing nations, aspiring to be developed nations, for example? Would you guys think about all this in PETA, or I'm just, jumping forward than the wagon here?
Well, our approach is different in every country, and certainly in America, vegetarianism is becoming a huge trend. You may have heard that even Beyonce and Jay-Z, they tried a vegan diet for a while. So there are more and more mock meat alternatives available in America, but we're seeing the same thing happening in Malaysia. And certainly, although animal rights or being a vegetarian is a newer concept here, it's one that is really going strong and that more and more people are embracing. Every time I come to Malaysia, there are more vegetarian restaurants here, which I'm always thrilled to try. And we're seeing more vegan products, more dairy alternatives, more meat alternatives available in common supermarkets. So that's all really encouraging.
Sometimes the complexity of the problem will need multiple approaches. And Malaysia is a plural country, for example. But if I go back to America, it's not just about meat, for example. It's not just about vegetables, for example. It's also the consumption of sugar and the lifestyle, whether you go and advocate for healthy lifestyle. So do you see a direct correlation, for example, based on the focus in America and the developed Western nations, of you can't just be advocating of moving your diet from meat to being a vegan, for example, but it will have to entail a more holistic approach in terms of lifestyle of a person?
Of course. Well, PETA is an animal rights organization, so our priority in encouraging vegetarianism is to protect animals. So while we do also advocate for human health and the environment, the animals are also our priority, which is why we say go vegetarian rather than, simply be healthy.
Yes.
But certainly for myself, I do avoid things like processed sugars, and I encourage all of my friends to do the same because they are extremely damaging to our health. And if you want to be healthy, you need to not be a vegetarian who eats soda and French fries, but be a vegetarian who also makes healthy choices every time you sit down to eat.
Do you see a movement of the extreme? Because on one hand, you have people going to the gym every day, advocating at least 2 to 4 hours there. On the other hand, there'll be couch potatoes. And, so society is fragmented that way. It's either I believe in PETA, for example, or I don't believe at all. It seems like a zero-sum game more often than not.
I think you need to find a middle ground. Going to the gym for 4 hours a day is certainly not practical. And one way that people can make a minimal change in their daily life and still have, a change in their health is to go vegetarian. So you don't need to spend 4 hours a day at the gym. You just need to skip the steak at dinner.
So where's the middle ground in society, like in North America, for example? Are you seeing it there happening?
Definitely. I think more and more people are becoming vegetarian. They're seeing that as an easy way to prevent obesity and to improve their health, lower their risk of diseases like cancers and heart disease. So that is a simple way that you can improve your health without having to invest hours of your time lifting weights or, running 20 kilometers a day.
Okay, I'm going to leave meat after this because it's not often that I have somebody like Ashley around. But maybe I'd like to go to pharmaceutical products, animal testing also, because yes, there's one thing talking about consumption of food, but the non-food application aspect also, it touches a lot of the aspects of the animal kingdom also, because do you have animal testing or not? That's a big deal, but can we really know just from buying the product? Is it clearly labeled, for example? So these are the stuff we want to talk about, because maybe in these parts of the world, we don't have many such labs that utilizes animal testing, for example, but maybe in the more developed nation, this is an issue. And before that comes to these parts of the world, maybe we need understanding and awareness now more often than not. So that is the discussion after this break. You are still watching a special recording of Agenda Awani, and I'm speaking in English because I have a very special guest, Ashley, in the studio from Peter. And we've talked about food, but let's go to the non-food aspect, which also sees a lot of debate about the ethical treatment of animals. And maybe if you can paint the picture for us, because maybe we don't have such big of an issue regarding animal testing in this country right now.
Well, actually, animal testing is an issue that affects almost every country, and it certainly is an issue in Malaysia. And one thing that we ask people to do, in addition to adopting a vegetarian diet, that makes a huge impact in the way animals are treated, is simply to buy products that are not tested on animals. So when you're choosing shampoo or dish soap or any other household or cosmetic product, we do ask people to avoid companies that test on animals. So by avoiding this, you're not supporting cruelties like rabbits having chemicals dripped into their eyes or rubbed onto their skins, or dogs and cats who are fed extreme quantities of substances in order to see at what rate it will kill them. So these are extremely cruel and often fatal tests.
How would a typical layman consumer know? Because at the end of the day, I'm rushing for time. I stop by a drugstore or a pharmacy or a hypermarket, and I'm just grabbing things, and my choice or my decision will be formed by many other modes of operations of communication. For example, if I see a billboard or an ad on TV. So if every product has that, yes, this product was made from animal testing, for example, then it would be much, much easier. But it's not. So how would PETA advocate that to be done?
Sadly, there aren't too many companies who do label their products, but there are several that do. So do check the label and see if it says not tested on animals. If it says not tested on animals or does not support animal testing, obviously it's safe to buy. But there's also a list of companies that do and don't test on animals available at our website, which is peta.org.
Cool.
So you can go there and simply print out a list to take with you shopping. But also you can choose to support larger companies like The Body Shop and Lush, who don't test any of their products on animals. So if you walk into the Body Shop, you can pick any item on the shelf because you know that none of them were tested on animals.
Okay. The moment you mention big names, for example, and we do know in food manufacturing and what more pharmaceuticals, for example, or even cosmetic ones, these are big organizations, corporates and conglomerates. So what has been the experience from your point of view of PETA advocating all this? Because surely there'll be resistance coming back from the other side. This kind of high-level advocacy, sometimes we only see it in international news wires like CNN when Greenpeace went into the ocean and blocked a few whaling ships, for example. But fights like this also happen every day. And if you can share with us some experiences.
That's actually a really good question as well, and you're right in saying that the government and the pharmaceutical and the meat industry, they have millions of dollars they can spend on advertising campaigns or PR or whatever they like. So for PETA, we don't have that kind of money. We can't pay for advertisements. So we do things like we did yesterday. We attract the media's and the public attention by wearing hazard suits or painting ourselves entirely green or doing something else that is creative and provocative and is going to turn heads and raise eyebrows and make people think.
So it deals a lot with communication and perception. And maybe compared to maybe 15 to 20 years ago, what happened in Canada and America stays in America and Canada, but the products are moving. So now you have to follow the trail because businesses are global, the supply chains are global, so you have no choice but to go global also.
Exactly. And when you're consuming meat or you're consuming anything, you really don't know where it was imported from. So that's why we're encouraging everybody, you don't know what's in your meat, please go vegetarian. It's really the best thing that you can do for your own health, the environment, and of course the animals.
Organic vegetarian or because it's mass produced also.
Of course.
Pesticides and whatever else.
We do encourage people to do what they can. So if you're not able to be fully organic, that's okay. If you're a vegetarian, that's a great start. Simply by avoiding meat, you're already making a great step for your health. And then just do what you can on the rest.
Yes. In terms of communication and perception, does it help now that in the 21st century, social media, for example, empowers people-to-people communication more vibrantly? You can speak one-to-one, you can speak 5-to-1, you can speak 10-to-10, points to multi-points, multi-points to multi-points, for example. Is this finally tools for David to fight Goliath, for example?
I think so. Yeah, social media is a really great tool, I think, for any social movement. And if you go onto our Facebook page, which is PETA Asia Pacific, you can see content there about animal rights. You can share it with your friends, and you can do this all instantly from your mobile phone while you're on the monorail home. So it's certainly something that enables people to communicate easily with others, to share information about social justice movements, and it's a really effective tool.
Maybe before we end this discussion, what would be the main point driving advocacy like this against big giants? Because, like you said, if you look at money, if you look at resources available, but maybe it's always the human spirit of wanting to see justice, wanting to see the right things being done, or just wanting to do a right thing, for example.
Yeah, as consumers, when we buy products, we're essentially voting with our dollars. So if you're buying a product that is tested on animals, or you're buying a chicken breast or a slab of steak, you're essentially paying for that cruelty to happen. So we encourage people to think, what if you had to kill the animal yourself? Would you do it? Certainly some people would, but many people are so disconnected by their food these days that there's no way they could kill a living, breathing, feeling animal. And if you wouldn't do it yourself, we would urge you, please don't hire the killers to do it for you. So please vote with your dollars and vote against animal cruelty.
Thank you very much, Ashley, for coming. And that's, again, not only first interview with people for ethical treatment of animals. Dan itu hanyalah satu sisi pandangan, tentunya pandangan berdasarkan aspek budaya dan juga suasana hidup di sini memberikan anda peluang untuk memberikan pandangan sendiri, hantarkan pandangan anda kepada pelbagai platform yang Astro Awani ada. Kita ada Facebook, kita ada Instagram, kita ada Twitter, ataupun terus pergi ke aplikasi mudah alih di iOS ataupun aplikasi Android di gadget mudah alih anda, dan anda boleh menonton episod seperti Agenda Awani ini secara langsung di gadget mudah alih anda. Sekian, selamat malam dan jumpa lagi.